only on Bloomberg Quint.
Good morning. You're watching All You Need to Know on Bloomberg Quint Live, India's first digital live streaming business news service. I am Akam Vakil. Here are the headlines. Asian markets post modest gains after the rally fizzles out on Wall Street. The Reserve Bank of India moves 3 more banks from the prompt corrective action framework. Allahabad Bank, Dena Bank and Dhanlaxmi Bank will move out. Jet Airways lead banker SBI calls for a meeting with the airline's chairman and CEO today. This is the first meeting after shareholders approved the debt recast. India's first retail giant, Kishore Biyani, admits that he missed the e-commerce bus, says he never had the money to board the bus in the first place. That's a Bloomberg Quint exclusive. Now, major U.S. stocks indices edged slightly lower on Tuesday as investors balanced mixed corporate earnings and more messaging of paused interest rate hikes from the Federal Reserve with ongoing U.S.-China trade negotiations. Bloomberg's Abigail Doolittle sums up all the Wall Street action in this report.
Stocks whipsawed between very small gains and losses in Tuesday's Wall Street session. But at the end of the day, the major averages, or the Dow, the S&P 500, and the Nasdaq, each finished fractionally lower. This, of course, as Jay Powell, the Fed chairman, did testify before Congress, not really shedding any new light on the Fed's recent policy shift toward a pause in terms of hiking rates. Now, beneath the surface, there were, not surprisingly, more sectors lower for the S&P 500 with that tiny decline. 7 of the sectors were lower, led by materials and healthcare, 4 higher, with technology up top. Now, beneath that relatively flat surface, or even very flat surface for the S&P 500, lots of outside movers, including AutoZone, the auto parts store. Those shares hitting an all-time high in an otherwise lackluster session, up more than 5% on a very strong quarter and outlook, taking Advance Auto Parts with the stock. A nice tailwind there for the auto parts sector. In the technology sector, Microsoft and Cisco, those were the 2 big point boosts there as investors are buying up those big tech names. On the downside, though, Home Depot, the home improvement store, those shares fell, one of the bigger drags on the S&P 500 after they put up a disappointing quarter, and the outlook not quite enough to excite investors despite announcing a $15 billion buyback and raising the dividend. So overall, when you put together the fact that stocks were down slightly, haven bonds higher, commodities about flat, Tuesday's Wall Street session did have neutral to slightly risk-off tones. In New York, Abigail Doolittle, Bloomberg News.
Now, the U.S. Federal Reserve Chairman Jerome Powell wraps up more than 2 hours of Senate testimony in giving a broader definition of what the Fed means when it says it will be patient in deciding when to change interest rates this year. Powell covered a range of topics in his appearance yesterday before the Senate Banking Committee. Bloomberg's Kathleen Hayes has highlights of the testimony in this report.
After his press conference, after the January meeting, numerous speeches from Fed officials, they have made it pretty clear they're data dependent, they're on policy pause, they know they might have to rate rates, but they're going to go report by report, meeting by meeting. And in fact, it was pretty clear from questions he was asked and how he answered them, because he made the same comment over and over and over. We have to be patient. We've heard that word before. So in answer to questions from the Senate Banking Committee, let's listen to just one example of Jay Powell and what he said.
The committee has decided that with our policy rate in the range of neutral, with muted inflation pressures and with some of the downside risks that we've talked about, this is a good time to be patient and watch and wait and see how the situation evolves.
He said also he sees a solid labor market, a strong economy, maybe slowing this year. Wages are rising, and that's not a problem because he doesn't see inflation being pushed up by that. Let's look at a chart from our Bloomberg library. I think it tells the story even better than I can in words. Our average hourly earnings, this white line running along the top, that's one of the main gauges of paychecks, okay? And you can see after running around 2.5% a couple years ago, now it's running over 3% year over year, supporting what Jay Powell says. Not a big move, nevertheless. Inflation Inflation, yes, it was lower last year. It's up to about 2% or just under 2%, near target, as Jay Powell said, but maybe not rising as much as wages, and maybe that's another reason why he's calm. He does say he's also watching inflation expectations very closely. Our Bloomberg charts show that inflation expectations, if you look at break-evens on 5-year, 10-year notes, et cetera, have started to move higher. We'll see what he says when he's asked about this again.
U.S. President Donald Trump and North Korean leader Kim Jong-un are meeting in Hanoi this week for the second time in less than a year in a bid to get Pyongyang to give up its nuclear program. Washington has demanded that Pyongyang abandon all its nuclear and missile programs, while North Korea wants sanctions to be removed as a part of the denuclearization negotiations. And Bloomberg's Stephen Engel has an outline of the tentative deal in this report.
Well, let me set the stage today. As you've said, the two leaders have arrived. Donald Trump arriving late last night here into Hanoi on Air Force One. Ahead, or after, I should say, Kim Jong-un arrived by Mercedes stretch limo from the border town after getting off his train earlier in the morning. We are here in front of the Ho Chi Minh Mausoleum behind me here. Very symbolic, of course, for the Vietnamese people, but also for Kim Jong-un. His grandfather in 1964 came here to Vietnam, and we're hearing that Kim Jong-un wants to kind of retrace the steps of his grandfather. A North Korean leader has not come to Vietnam since that visit by Kim Il-sung in 1964, and I believe one of the regrets that Kim Jong-un has is that he never had a photo with his grandfather. His grandfather died in 1994 when Kim Jong-un was just 10 years old, so he is apparently retracing the steps. There were rumors that he might go even to Ha Long Bay, which Kim Il-sung also did. We have not confirmed that rumor. Nevertheless, it's a busy day today for both Donald Trump and Kim Jong-un. Donald Trump will also come here. He'll probably drive right past this main boulevard that goes past the mausoleum to the presidential palace, which is right next door. There's going to be a photo op at 10:55 in the morning local time, 11:55 Hong Kong, followed by a meeting with the with the president at 11:10 local time. Then there will be a working lunch with the prime minister in the prime minister's office, which is a large brand new building just behind the presidential palace. So a big busy day for Donald Trump and also Kim Jong-un. We're hearing Kim Jong-un might also pay his respects to Ho Chi Minh here at the mausoleum later today before they meet for dinner later tonight and one-on-one for 20 minutes.
Right then, taking stock of what's happening in Asian markets, we have Sophie Kamaradunin of Bloomberg News joining us live from the Hong Kong studio. Good morning, Sophie.
Well, good morning. Midweek, Asian stocks are posting modest gains. We are seeing the Nikkei 225 at 0.4%, with chemical and pharma companies leading the advance in Tokyo, while machinery makers are sliding. Komatsu, for example, slipping after being downgraded at JP Morgan. Some pressure also coming through perhaps from UBS turning bearish on Komatsu rival Caterpillar. Now, elsewhere, the ASX 200 is climbing with miners and banks in pole position, and we are waiting on Rio Tinto's results due after the market close in Australia. Now, here in Hong Kong, the Hang Seng is rising about 0.4%, with industrials and healthcare the biggest boost, and the Shanghai Comp is advancing this morning. We're watching to see if the index will reach 3,000 points, which some opine will be the real start of the bull market. Back to you.
Sophie, thank you for bringing us those updates when it comes to Asian markets. But what can India do based on the kind of global cues it is seeing? The SGX Nifty futures at this point in time is showing well, about less than 0.5% gains, but well, gains all the same. How did we end up yesterday's day of trade? A very, very big day in terms of geopolitical developments. And well, we did see the Nifty come off by around 0.5%, certainly off day's lows. And the mid-cap and the small-cap indices actually, well, mixed cues coming in there. But the banking indices again fell. There was a little more weakness in the PSU banking index, but considering we have 3 banks coming out of the PCA framework, we're likely to see some strength there as well. Now, in terms of ADRs, Tata Motors and Dr. Reddy's among the two stocks that advanced, but several other stocks declined in trade, and that includes something like an HDFC Bank, Infosys, and Wipro. But moving on, we also have foreign institutional flows which took the opportunity to move into the markets, and they bought stock worth around 1,674 odd crores on a net basis. DIs, on the other hand, removing another 720 odd crores. As far as HDFC, ICICI Bank, and Infosys, along with Reliance, is concerned, those stocks did bear down on the indices, but TCSZ and Tata Motors providing some amount of support going in trade. But in terms of futures and options, and of course we are looking at expiry today and tomorrow as the final day of expiry, rollovers picking up at 33%, largely on an average basis, not too much to speak for. The Nifty banking rollovers as well standing at around 30%. And moving on to your open interest distribution, at this point in time, it's between, well, largely 10,800 now from 10,700, and we're going to keep in mind that 200 to 300 point range as we move in. Of course, a lot of unwinding in the 10,700, 800 puts. But VIX rose by as much as 11.5% to around 17. But the real question is this going to stay here? The Nifty put call ratio largely unchanged at 1.4. The Nifty banking put call ratio also at 1.2. And we have Adani Enterprises and Adani Power remaining in the F&O ban, as is the case for IDBI Bank, Jet Airways, and Reliance Power. But we have one more stock moving out of the F&O ban, that is the bank which also moves out of the government's PCA framework, or the Reserve Banks of India's PCA framework. So Allahabad Bank is the one that you need to keep an eye on. HUL, Siemens, and TVS Motor here stands out, considering the increase in OI, but I'm sure in terms of unwinding, there'll be a lot more out here, considering it is going to be rollover. So MGL, Allahabad Bank, Chennai Petro, and Bharti Infratel. Keep an eye on these counters as we move into trade. But now let's go and see what's making the headlines across the globe. We have Sue Keenan of Bloomberg News getting us the first word headlines.
Goldman Sachs saying the global economy may have already bottomed out, with the bank's current activity indicator slightly higher than numbers for December and January. Chief economist Jan Hatzius says growth remains soft, but there are signs of green shoots emerging. JP Morgan is a little less optimistic. Its chief Jamie Dimon says he's readying the bank for downturn risks.
We are prepared for a recession. I saw one of the things that came across the tape saying that, JP Morgan is preparing for a recession, that we're not predicting a recession. We're pointing out that we are very conscious about the risk we bear as a company.
In Washington, the House has voted to block President Trump's declaration of a national emergency on the Mexican border. But the vote fell short of the two-thirds majority needed to foil a promised presidential veto. The bill now goes to the Senate, where the Republican majority must decide whether to defy their president. Trump's emergency declaration allows him to divert money from elsewhere in the federal budget. And sterling jumped as Theresa May, the UK Prime Minister, sought to calm fears of a no-deal Brexit. It touched its highest level against the euro in almost 2 years. And that's as the Prime Minister promised to let Parliament vote to delay the UK's departure from the EU and block the prospect of a no-deal divorce. Now, May said she'll continue pushing for an acceptable deal with Brussels so Brexit can happen as planned on March 29th. But if that's not possible, Britain won't leave without Parliament's agreements. To oil now. Oil rose after an industry report in the U.S. showed a surprise decline in U.S. crude supplies. Now, the American Petroleum Institute was said to report stockpiles fell by 4.2 million barrels last week. A drawdown would be the first since early January if official data confirms it later. The government report is due out Wednesday mid-morning. Now, President Trump earlier tweeted that prices are too high and called on OPEC to, quote, take it easy on its output cuts. Meanwhile, the White House has set low ambitions for the talks between President Trump and Kim Jong-un, with the two sides yet to even agree on their goals and the definition of denuclearization. Our chief North Asia correspondent will be along shortly. That is the latest here for Bloomberg News. I'm Sue Keenan. Back to you.
The Reserve Bank of India on Tuesday released Allahabad Bank, Corporation Bank as well as Dhanlaxmi Bank from its prompt corrective action framework. Now, according to a statement by the Reserve Bank of India, both public sector banks, which is Allahabad Bank and Corporation Bank, have recently received a large amount of capital from the central government. Allahabad Bank last week received about 6,900 crore, while Corporation Bank received a little over 9,000 crore as part of the government's recapitalization plan. This capital, according to the Reserve Bank of India, has helped both these banks improve their capital adequacy ratios, while also helping them better provide for some of the bad loans that are there on their books. In turn, the net NPA ratio for both of these banks has also improved to above the risk threshold that the Reserve Bank of India has set for PCA framework banks. Because of this improvement, this operational improvement, as well as some of the commitments that the banks have given to the Reserve Bank of India with respect to how they're going to sustain their performance, the Reserve Bank feels, especially the Board for Financial Supervision feels, that both these banks deserve to get out of the PCA framework and continue their businesses without any kind of restrictions that the PCA framework would place on them. As far as Dhanlaxmi Bank goes, its operational performance has been improving consistently according to the Reserve Bank of India. All of its ratios, which is the Common Equity Tier 1 ratio as well as the net NPA ratio, are far below what the risk threshold mandates for a bank to enter the PCA framework, and therefore Dhanlaxmi Bank has also been allowed to let go. Remember that last month, on the 31st of January, the Reserve Bank of India had released Bank of India, Bank of Maharashtra, as well as Oriental Bank of Commerce from the PCA framework. So all in all, about 5 public sector banks and 1 private bank are now out of this framework and can continue their lending activities without any restrictions that the RBI might be placing.
People get valuation of things they don't understand. So I think e-commerce is not understood. And that's why they are getting valuation.
Please explain.
I think nobody understands that business. The more losses you make, more valuation you get. I can't understand that.
But it's about customer acquisition, and you have to admit that they are doing a reasonable job of
acquiring customers. If I look at the sales of Flipkart today, I saw the report. They did around 30,000 crores of business, out of which 65% of the business came out of electronics and mobile phones. So that's 20,000 crores gone. Now balance 10,000 crores of business they did. I think 90% of business must have been done at 40 to 60% discount.
You're complaining about discounts?
I'm not complaining at all.
I remember what Sabse Acha Wednesday. What was the first one that you did?
I think it's not about...
Sabse Sasta Wednesday.
I wish and hope we had that kind of money to do Sabse Acha then in a different way.
You did.
But we never...
Some might say
we never sold below cost price, ever.
Are you sure about that?
I'm 110% sure about it.
1,000% sure you never sold below cost price?
1,100% sure about it, except in the last 2 years.
Except in the?
Last 2 years.
In the last 2 years, you've been selling below cost price.
We are using the digital medium to give discounts in our wallets.
So you're also selling below cost price?
But I'm not giving discounts cash in the end of the customer.
If you hold your ear this way or the other way, it's still the same thing.
I think the market scenes have changed. Everybody's getting into predatory pricing. You have to come up. We have come up with our wallet now. We give money in the wallet. But money in the wallet is again going to come to be spent with us only because it's a closed loop wallet.
Correct. And many of these e-commerce platforms are doing very similar strategies.
Nobody has, everybody has
open cashback and things like that.
Everybody has an open loop wallet. Every one of them. You can use that money anywhere. In our case, you can use money only in the format in which you got
what if I was to argue, Mr. Biyani, that there was a time when there were such few players in modern retail that there was very little competitive pressure on you. Today, it's the customer who's king, and eventually, it is the foreign giants or the large Indian e-commerce platforms that may be using deep discounting to force players like you to also start thinking of more aggressive pricing.
Fair enough. So
till now,
we have to respond.
Till now, you were sanguine. It's competition that's forced you to do it.
I'm not a purist. I think I will respond to the way consumers want it.
So far, you didn't do it because...
I didn't have the money to do it. I created a wallet to do it now. I was smarter enough to create a wallet so that the money is spent again with me only.
Correct. I'm sure many of them also have similar.
I don't think so. Nobody has that model. Again, I'm reiterating that.
Nobody has a wallet like yours.
Nobody has a wallet which is a closed loop wallet.
Okay. Nobody has a wallet like Mr. Biyani's.
Let's look at the stocks that will be in focus today, starting with earnings. Sanofi India came out with their Q4 results. Their revenues were up 8.4%, profit was up 4.3%, EBITDA was up 2.2%, and margins were at 18.9% compared to 20%. Higher raw materials and employee costs dent margins, and anti-diabetic and gastro drive growth. Anyway, Max India's board approves divestment of entire stake of 51% from Max Bupa Health Insurance to True North Fund for rupees 511 crores. The proposed transaction has valued Max Bupa at an enterprise value of 1,001 crores. MRF says that the strike at its Chennai plant has been called off. A large number of workmen had gone on strike with effect from February 9th. GMR Infra Arm becomes highest bidder for Greenfield Airport at Bhogapuram in Andhra Pradesh on a private-public partnership basis. The initial capacity of the airport will be to operate for 6 million passengers per annum, with the initial investment pegged at 2,300 crores. Then we have S. Chandan Company. They acquire remaining 26% stake in Chaya Prakashini for rupees 64.24 crores. Acquired 74% stake in the aforementioned target company for rupees 170 crores in December 2016. Company says the rationale for the investment is to expand its presence in eastern India. PNGRB releases letter of intent related to 10 round of city gas auction. It allotted 50 geographical areas to 12 entities. HPCL got allotted 9 areas. IOCL got 9 areas. Gujarat Gas Limited got 6 areas. GAIL Gas Limited got allotted 4 areas. IGL got 3 areas. Adani Gas and Bharat Gas got 2 areas each. And Adani Gas IOCL joint venture got 1 area allotted.
They have delivered a strike which is precise, proportionate, and professional. There is no question that it was meticulously planned and executed with minimal collateral damage, and it was pinpointed on a terrorist infrastructure in Pakistan. But the significance of this strike is that it marks the end of the policy of strategic restraint by India. If you go back to 1998 and the nuclear tests that both India and Pakistan conducted, India took the line that with both countries possessing nuclear weapons, it was not possible to engage in conflict hereafter. But the Pakistanis decided that it gave them an opportunity to do asymmetrical attacks on India through cross-border terrorism, without India having the capacity to retaliate because it could escalate. This bluff has been called for the first time by India, and India has made it clear that retaliation will follow, and our strategic restraint should not be regarded as weakness. We took a policy decision during Kargil that the Indian armed forces would not cross the line of control, and it was meticulously observed. But in the surgical strikes, India took the step of crossing the LOC in a shallow attack on territory under Pakistan's governance, but technically belonging to India. But today, the attack was Pakistan's territory. The message is loud and clear that if you continue with cross-border terrorism, retaliation will follow, and territories in Pakistan will not be spared. I think that's a message which both Pakistan and the international community have to understand.
Okay, Michael Kugelman, I want to welcome you to the show and also understand what happens next. There is a statement from the Foreign Secretary of India which talks about Balakot, but does not pinpoint exactly where. There are 2 locations named Balakot, in Pakistan, and one in Pakistan-occupied Kashmir. Secondly, the response from Pakistan, where they first said that, okay, the Indian Air Force did come in, but nothing much happened. Then they said that we will also retaliate. How do you read into the statements coming in from India and Pakistan?
Well, it's sort of like deja vu. It reminds me a lot of what happened after the surgical strike in September 2016, right? I mean, you have this this assertion coming from India that something really big was done, and then the Pakistanis have sort of tried to downplay and at times seemingly deny before sort of coming out with a rather inconsistent response as to reaction as to what had happened. I think that you know, the messaging from the Pakistani leadership, to me, suggests that the notion of an imminent, visible retaliation by the Pakistanis is probably quite unlikely. I do think that you know, what Pakistan could certainly try to do, and this would not be anything new, is simply double down on its embrace of these non-state militant actors like Jaish-e-Mohammed that it's looked to for many years to try to punish India in ways that Pakistan's conventional military forces cannot, because they're inferior to those of India. You know, it was not surprising that the Pakistani statements today have been rather vague. I think, quite frankly, that they probably don't know what they want to do just yet. But the fact that from pretty early on you had what seemed to be an effort to downplay what happened, and that to me suggests that they're not in a position, they don't have willingness or capacity to respond in a very muscular and visible way. So, you know, we'll see. But I do think at the least that what we would have to...
Yeah, one marked difference though, Michael, because you said this was a lot like, you know, the first round of surgical strikes after the attack in Uri. But there's one marked difference, isn't there? There, Pakistan for the first few days was denying it even happened. Here, actually, the first information of sorts came from the Pakistani side, from a Twitter handle from a general in the Pakistani army, who came out and said that, yes, India did come in. Though, of course, what he said was that India came in, but, you know, they had to go back and they dropped the payload hastily and nothing really happened. But that's very different from what happened the last time round, isn't it, Michael?
No, it is, absolutely. I don't want to overstate the similarities. And clearly, I think the biggest difference, you know, if once the details really become clear, is the location of this strike. I mean, there has been confusion as to which Balakot was where this operation actually happened. If indeed this operation did happen in Khyber Pakhtunkhwa province, if it did not happen in Kashmir, you know, that would really be some type of new precedent, I think. And I think that would really be quite worrisome and alarming to the Pakistani military, much more alarming than what you had in 2016, which essentially amounted to a limited airstrike along the border. But if we're talking about Indian aircraft going over the border, over Kashmir, into KPK, launching the strike, and then getting out of there, that's very significant. It would be embarrassing and concerning for the Pakistani military. So I see that as the real major difference between what's happened today and what happened in 2016.